Hello, we have reached the time of your final section test, which is due Monday, August 22nd. No, my error. Tuesday, August 22nd, I will edit that. At 11:55 p.m., that's 5 minutes to midnight. So it's not 5 p.m. like normally, but 5 minutes to midnight. You should also note, I've noticed quite a few of you haven't been participating in the forums up until this point. If you're worried about your grade in this class, please note that the forums are worth 10% of your final grade. That's a full letter grade difference that is up for grabs there. So if you're worried about your grade, the best way to engage with the course in order to help your grade would be to complete those forms and do so like even excessively if you're worried. Preparation is important for these tests. The beginning part of the test actually just has a bunch of boilerplate that you've seen on all of the test to date. It lists the readings and it lists all of the video material. You're expected to actually engage with and go through this video material. I consider it background. When I grade your responses, I'm looking for evidence that you've sort of engaged with the thought processes that have been introduced in the video material. These are resources that I expect that you have made use of. Right. Description of the section tests, 5 points each, total 30 points, 6 questions. The usual. The questions usually ask you to do a couple of things, not just one. So if you're looking to break the question down into its various parts, as I will in this video, and make sure to answer the questions fully. Missed assignment policy, if you're going to miss this one or have missed it, you have to let me know, preferably beforehand or within 12 hours of the missed assignment, in order to be granted any sort of extension. With regard to that, I am on a very strict deadline with this final exam. My contract tells me that, well, here is my contract. And there is a note in the contract that tells me that my grades have to be submitted within 48 hours of here it requires that you post grades to sale no later than 48 hours after the final exam, which this is. The final exam schedule is listed in the office of the registrar, blah, blah, blah. I gave you a little bit of extra time with this. We have a slot, but since it's an online course, we can be a little bit flexible with regard to that. So it's August 22nd, which is the second to last day of exams. And exams end on the 23rd, so enjoy the extra time. I'm also posting these materials a little bit early to give you time to prepare and work through in smaller bites these kind of questions. Now, that is the deal there. There are a few of you who I still owe grades for Section Test 2. These summer courses are very quick, and I've fallen a little bit behind. Today and tomorrow I have a bit of time, and I should be able to finish that off. I've also noticed that there are a couple of questions pertaining to the grade of the previous exam. Please rest assured that I will get to those and reply to your emails. It's like I say, I've fallen behind in a very quick semester, and these online courses involve a lot of digital communication, and I might speak at 250 words a minute. I type maybe at 100, so that takes longer to reply to an email than to have an in-person exchange with regard to these kinds of questions. The questions. There are six of them, three on Kierkegaard, three on Nietzsche. One of the Nietzsche questions pertains to one of the videos that I've required you to screen. You know the drill with these questions. They're short answer, bare minimum of one paragraph in response. At bare minimum, a paragraph is 3 sentences. If you've got 2 sentences, you don't have a paragraph. But your responses should be substantial and exceed this minimum. Right. So the idea is answer this until the questions are. I cannot see a 3-sentence response to these questions being sufficient, right? But minimums are there because we need minimums. By sentences, I mean full sentences. Point form responses are far too vague to serve as acceptable. On the subject as well, please proofread and make sure that you are clearly and completely sort of representing the concepts and ideas. Basically, I can't give grades for implication. I need you to be explicit, and this is one of the course objectives, to get you writing clearly and explicitly about ideas. When you imply, you're just merely implying. You haven't said it. You haven't demonstrated that you know what you're talking about, and that sort of thing. I know my comments may seem like I'm being hard or kind of a jerk, but really all I'm trying to do is help you become better writers about ideas, which is important, especially now that we are writing more in the digital age and trying to convey ideas not in person where there's an immediate exchange. In person, I can say, okay, you claim this. What do you mean by that? Right? And then you would be able to expand and clarify. In writing, it's easy to be misinterpreted. So these are skills that will help you engage with the digital world more effectively. Right. Now, this material, it's not as straightforward as the previous. I mean, the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Hobbes defined terms, made arguments, etc., etc. Largely, these positions that you're getting from both Kierkegaard and Nietzsche are trying to use language to instrumentally get you to think more deeply and more carefully about things, aspects of human experience and your life, and how you desire the things that you desire, how you relate to making choices. These sorts of things, we tend to think, yeah, I know that already. But really the thought is that if we present this material in a certain light, it will become clear that we haven't thought as carefully as we think we have about these aspects of human experience and human reality. Right? So Kierkegaard, for example, creates sort of a philosophical psychology to handle terms like anxiety and despair, which at the time of the writing of these documents that we're looking at, not much work had been done about. Right, so likewise, in Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols, he tries to isolate the unarticulated assumptions in our dogmatically held beliefs. Right. So what philosophically needs to be the case in order to make that belief true? Now let's evaluate that philosophical basis. Right. What sort of assumptions are you making when you make philosophical judgment? Right. So to a certain extent, what Nietzsche is doing is meta-philosophy or after-philosophy. It's philosophy about the kind of philosophy that's been done to date. Right? So the unifying term between these two theorists is spirit. Right? So we'll be talking a lot about that in your responses, which I define in the videos. I try to define it quite clearly. So the questions, like I say, there are 6. There are 3 on Kierkegaard, 3 on Nietzsche. Fairly straightforward. The first 2 are on anxiety, and the third one is about despair. Kierkegaard introduces anxiety as, quote, the dizziness of freedom, and as something that arises as a result of human beings being qualified by spirit. What does he mean by this? Right? By this, I mean there are two claims that Kierkegaard has made that I'm asking you to evaluate as sort of an overview of Kierkegaard's position. What does Kierkegaard mean by the anxiety being the dizziness of freedom? And in what way is it connected to spirit? All right, so you've got two things to juggle with regard to the first question. The Philosophize This podcasts will be quite useful for this, and I tried to break down a little bit in the two videos that I posted in the playlist for you what Kierkegaard means by spirit. All right, so that will be very handy for you. And so you should have good resources to break this down and understand what is going on. Then a conclusion from Kierkegaard's concept of anxiety. Kierkegaard concludes our selection of the concept of anxiety because this is not the full dialogue, it's abridged what we get here. I didn't want to have you read the whole thing, which is substantial, and I have over here, but that's pointless. I'm dragging it out. Anyhow, so he concludes our abridged selection from the concept of anxiety by suggesting that a qualitative leap is never necessary to overcome anxiety. What is meant by qualitative leap, and what can I do about anxiety is the question. Let me see. You should have resources for this as well in my videos and in the Philosophize This podcasts, which are more directly related to the concept of anxiety. It's a leap of faith, basically, and in what sense can a leap of faith address anxiety is the question, right? So that's it's again two parts to the question. Make sure you do the one, do the other, answer it completely. And then finally for Kierkegaard, Kierkegaard discusses two sorts of despair, quote, in the strict sense, and that's from Kierkegaard 351. They are, quote, not to will to be oneself, and, quote, in despair to will to be oneself, again 351. Briefly discuss each, distinguishing between them and noting the respects in which they are structurally similar. Right. My video goes into some detail about this. You might start this question by giving me a quick introduction of what is meant by despair. Despair is the sickness unto death. Roderick's video is actually very good at laying this out for you. He focuses on that first kind of not yet despair, which is similar to zombie movies. They're why they scare us, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, the two additional types of despair, right? It's Kierkegaard defines us as beings that are relations, that relate ourselves to ourselves. We're not the relation, but the relation's relating itself to itself, right? And all the kinds of despair are breakdowns in the way that we relate to ourselves as the relation, right? So, and the two specific ones are distinct ways in which this breakdown occurs. So Roderick's very good at introducing the idea that this is not a mood problem. It's not something a psychologist can actually help you unless they numb you to the despair of relating to yourself as the relation. Right. So, in fact, really, this is a philosophical, and Kierkegaard argues, religious problem that we need a leap of faith to properly address. Right. So, anyhow, that's Kierkegaard. That's that far. Right. The reason I'm presenting both these theorists to you is they start from the position of the existing individual. right? And we've not had a lot of that. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Hobbes have all defined an abstract notion of man, which then is applied to individuals, right? And the question is how I, as an existing individual, fit this general essence or definition of human. Basically, these two theorists, Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, both address the human qua human. The human as human, right? The human is a situated being that's trying to make decisions in a world that it didn't choose. We're just tossed into the world. People are tossing definitions, and you've seen 4 different definitions, concepts of human presented to you, kind of thing. And it's always a little awkward fitting into basically this branch of philosophy, this sort of proto-existentialism that we're looking at, has you not engage with your life as a project of fitting into a definition, but your life as making choices in a world that you didn't choose, right? With people that want to define you in particular kinds of way. How do we actually make these choices? How do we actually give our lives meaning? So in that vein, Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols directly tries to engage a lot of dogmatic assumptions that have become sort of sacrosanct, right, philosophically. It starts with the problem of Socrates, so the end of the course harkens back to the beginning of the course. The first question, there are basically three parts to the argument that I presented to you with Twilight of the Idols. The problem with Socrates, reason in philosophy, and the third one is morality is anti-nature. All right, so I try to kind of follow that schema while throwing in a question pertaining to the Roderick video in your exam, kind of thing. So in Twilight of the Idols, in section 2 of the problem of Socrates, Nietzsche makes the following claim. One must by all means stretch out one's fingers and make an attempt to grasp this amazing finesse that the value of life cannot be estimated. Right. So I'll just grab one of my copies of the Portable Nietzsche. It's funny how you wind up with a lot of these. This is Portable Nietzsche 474. So I'll just flip to 474 here and read the full passage here. Okay, 474. One must by all means stretch out one's fingers and make the attempt to grasp this amazing finesse that the value of life cannot be estimated. Not by the living, for they are an interested party and even a bone of contention, and not judges, and not by the dead, for a different reason. For a philosopher to see a problem in the value of life is thus an objection to him, a question mark concerning his wisdom and unwisdom. Indeed, are all these great were all these great and wise men. They were not only decadents, but also not wise at all. But I return to the problem of Socrates. This is central to Nietzsche's position in Twilight of the Idols. The notion here is that to make a judgment about life, right, the value of life, really winds up telling you something more about the person making the judgment, right? Because these judgments about the value of life are not true or false. They are rather judgments that show something about your disposition, right? So to a certain extent, we are back to Kierkegaard. You see, there's a structural similarity here, right? Because if we think about what despair is, right, that's a judgment about ourselves and everything that we relate to, right? What Nietzsche is claiming in the problem of Socrates, that to say life is no good is an objection to the person making the judgment and not true or false. Right? It's not true that life is awful. Right? Life is, then we judge it to be awful. Right? The simple way to engage with this is, I like ice cream. Demonstrate to me that I'm wrong. Go ahead. Go ahead. All right. I just told you something about me, not about ice cream. So to a certain extent, we're back to my introductory lectures on Socrates, where I talked about euthyphro, right? Piety, right, is what's pleasing to the gods. Well, is it pious because it's pleasing to the gods, or is it pleasing to the gods because it's pious? Right? But generally, what we find more specifically going on in both Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, really, I'm giving you an overview here, is something more human and applied to us, right? Not a drive for an answer to a what is X question, where the answer is an essence, right? So, anyhow, that's about the act of making a judgment. What does Nietzsche mean by this? Right, so I want you to analyze this position as introduced in that specific passage. Right, so I even gave you the page reference in the passage. Do an analysis of it. My video actually goes into this in some detail. Second Nietzsche question number 5 on your exam. Roderick, while discussing the paradox of interpretation raised by Nietzsche, claims, quote, it's crucially important in the political economy of the university to try to deny Nietzsche's insight for this reason, if it is one. Briefly discuss this issue. For this, you're going to have to go back to why am I you're going to have to go back to the Roderick video. The version of the Roderick video that I've given you, it's possible to Google search one without the 10-minute breaks and without the transcript, but I give you the one with the transcript so you can search it, you can read it, you can quote it, all of that, right? So you can find this and actually just think through the argument that Roderick is raising about Nietzsche, because it plays into, as we've seen from question number 4, the whole issue of interpreting. Roderick is arguing along with Nietzsche that it might be impossible to get to the academic holy grail, the right interpretation. Right? So this undermines what people like Bloom present as academic standards kind of thing, and presents us with a position in which the whole activity of academic sort of learning looks very different than the kind of rote exercise that it's normally presented as. Right? So analyze that along with Roderick and Nietzsche. Basically, I want an argument summary there. All right? And then finally, in Twilight of the Idols, you see I was merciful. The section Reason and Philosophy, I didn't ask you a question about that, because it is complicated, right? Where Nietzsche presents the two paradoxes. It's a complicated kind of argument to follow. In a regular semester where I might have a little bit more time with this material, I might actually have you untie one of those tightly wound knots, right, of the two paradoxes. I might even have you do both in a question, but nonetheless, it's summer, and you haven't had a ton of time with this material, so I'm trying to be a bit merciful here. So, final question. In Twilight of the Idols, in the section called Morality is Anti-Nature, Nietzsche presents a rather damning criticism of Christian morality, claiming that this form of morality turns hostilely against the passions, or is an attempt to kill the passions. At one point, he compares it to castration. Here, the alternative Nietzsche proposes is the, quote, spiritualization of passion. Portable Nietzsche 47, for which he gives us two examples, love and hostility. So I want you to do a few things here. Briefly discuss how Nietzsche uses these passions as examples of triumph over the prevailing form of morality. Right? So in order to do that, you're going to have to talk a little bit about what Nietzsche means by spiritualization of the passions. Right? So effectively, what I want you to do is unpack the two examples by presenting an overview of Nietzsche's solution, the spiritualization of the passions, right? Rather than castration, prohibition, or an attempt to kill the passions, right? As Nietzsche presents the whole tract of Christian morality, right? Oddly, I mean, a very involved response to this, and you don't have to do a very involved response, but just to show you how Nietzsche's been making a consistent argument. This goes all the way back to the problem of Socrates, where Nietzsche is talking about turning reason into a tyrant, right? Opposing reason to the passions, right? And in that section, you see, this is a new used copy of the book, and my copy usually just falls open to the page that I want here, right? It just, again, to show you how this is a consistent position, argued throughout Twilight of the Idols, page 479 from The Problem of Socrates. The most blinding daylight, rationality at any price, life bright, cold, cautious, conscious, without instinct, in opposition to the instincts which we saw in Socrates early on. All this, too, was a mere disease, another disease, and by no means a return to virtue, to health, to happiness, to have to fight the instincts. That is the formula for decadence. As long as life is ascending, or healthy, or vital, or able to express itself as life, happiness equals instinct. So it's very consistent, the argument that's made throughout Twilight of the Idols here, and I'm just pointing that out to you with the final question. All along in the course, I've been trying to give you detailed comments, not to be a jerk, not to be punitive or anything along those lines, but to explain to you, to sort of lay out for you what sorts of things that you need to address in a complete, clear, concise answer that conveys an idea. All right. So throughout, I've tried to, and you've probably noticed, there have been a lot of comments on your assignments due to the really strict deadline that I'm operating under for the final exam. I get these and I got 48 hours to turn them around. So it's going to be a lot of lack of sleep for me, and it's going to be a lot of late nights up trying to grade through, because I'm still analyzing and reading through your responses. The only way I can save time and get this in on time is if I just issue you a grade at the conclusion rather than typing out the entire response, because that takes a lot of time. So when you get your response to your submission for this final section test, your final, well, a couple of things about it. Well, first of all, you're just going to get a grade and not a detailed breakdown of how you were assessed. I'll make a note in the comments there about a date after which, because after I'm done teaching this course, I need a deep breath and I need to prep my courses for the fall. Plus, I've got a number of other research commitments. Basically, after that date, I will have a bit of time to give you detailed breakdowns if you would like to see how in more detail you were assessed. If you're good with your grade, you're good with your grade. But nonetheless, just to expedite things, I'm just going to give you a grade rather than a detailed breakdown. I'd be more than happy to have a more detailed discussion of your submission for this test. The other thing that I will note in those comments is that your discussion forum participation won't show up on Moodle. It will be calculated into your final grade and evaluated by the sort of criteria that I lay out in the course syllabus, which I'm sure I have a copy of here somewhere. Course syllabus. That feels like a syllabus to me. Yep, here we go. Let me see. Discussion forums. I ask myself three questions when I assign grades for these forums. One is, have you participated? Have you posted at least once for each topic? More is better here. The idea is to foster an ongoing, I should underline that word, conversation about the issues raised by the material at hand. You're supposed to be talking about the details of this material throughout the course, right? This is supposed to be an educational resource that helps everyone. It's a think tank to get through these theories, which are strange and weird and difficult to comprehend. Two, are the posts substantial? Do the posts offered show an engagement with the material? Right, so I do read every single one of them, and I ask myself, okay, does this show an engagement with the material? Have you read? Do you understand? Or is it an off-the-cuff response that doesn't show that you've really attempted to comprehend the material? Right, so I want to see engagement with the material in your posts. And then third, are the posts timely? All right, I pointed this out to you in the welcome video, and it's right here on the course syllabus, which you've had since the beginning of the course. The question is, are the posts timely, or did the student wait until the last minute to do all of them? Given that you've got about a week left to do these posts, the time is now to get them in if they're coming in. I will assess grades and give credit for posts that come in right up to the very last minute. And believe me, in previous semesters, I have students trying to get these posts in right up until 11:55 when they automatically shut down. I notice if they're all last minute. Right? Moodle tells me things about when you do what. Right, so that actually goes into my grade calculation as well. So the sooner the better if you're trying to get that portion of your grade to enhance your performance in the class. Overall, let's just draw this to a conclusion. This final, I look forward to reading your responses to it. I look forward to reading all of your responses. I'm fascinated with the way that other people read and try to comprehend weird material like this. Right? It's fascinating to me to actually read through student responses. I've read some absolutely beautiful, eloquent responses to these questions that have deeply impressed me. Right? I've seen great potential in other responses that, in terms of clarity or precision, it fell a little bit short of the mark as well. But nonetheless, this is my gig. I enjoy this. Right? It takes a lot out of me because I read your responses, as you've probably noticed, very closely. Right? So, and basically, I'm trying to mine your responses for as many grades, as much credit as is possible. So if you have any questions about this material, again, discussion forums, that's a good way to get marks for improving your mark. But I'm also here to help. I'm a little bit behind, but we've got a week. I should be able to catch up, and I'll respond to any questions that you've got about this material. And have good days, one for each of you.